Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 141 of the Best Games period. What? We're at 141 episodes. That's crazy. What's up with that? Um, and you'd think I could stop saying so much by now, but you're wrong, and I will keep using those filler words as much as I dang well please. I'm your host, Jack Gardner, and with me this week is no one. It's just myself and the lovely live audience because we're trying to do this thing where we live stream the recording of episodes and also the editing of episodes. And this episode in particular is being both streamed on both accounts back to back. So if you want to get in on that, make sure that you become a patron of patreon.com/bestgamesperiod, and you'll be able to watch both of those things every week. And on top of that, if you are a patron, you will have... I forget exactly how the tiers have been set up so far, but... those who back at a certain tier will be able to watch the nice chill streams and kind of hang out. Kind of becomes like a nice little AMA type thing. And this week we're just kind of giving everybody a taste of that. And yeah, please do that. There are lots of other perks to becoming a patron. For example, you get access to the Discord, which is soon to be launching. You get access to all of the super special secret posts that get posted to Patreon, and that does include full episodes that are just for patrons, so be sure to check that out. Now, I know a lot of people are probably expecting talk about the Game Awards to be going on here. I did not watch the Game Awards, so I will not be talking about that. I had other things going on. I had things that I wanted to do instead. And it's gotten to the point now where I'm kind of like done with award shows in the industry. Like, I feel like I've seen enough of that. I've hung out with some of those people in parties at industry events, and it's just kind of like a little weird. And yeah, I don't know. I don't want to go too deep into that, but it's suffice it to say it's not super intriguing to me. I don't particularly like that they're marrying reveals with award shows. I understand why they're doing it, but it's pretty weird. It's like a combination of like the Oscars and Comic-Con, and I don't like it. I think that's weird. I know that I understand why a game that hasn't come out yet would want the association of prestige, like prestige awards associated with it, but I don't know, leaves a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. That being said, I'm not going to be talking about that. I could, but I'm not. Instead, we will be talking about the main topic for this week, which I was kind of hoping I would have a co-host on this one, but I honestly don't know. I don't know very many other people who have played a significant chunk of Frostpunk. It has sold very well for an indie strategy game. Last I checked the Wikipedia page, it had sold like 1.4, 1.5 million, somewhere in there. And that's super impressive for that sort of game. So Frostpunk is... How to describe this? So it came out in 2018, April of 2018, and the game itself was created by 11-bit studios, and they made a name for themselves by creating a wartime sim called This War of Mine. And the basic premise of This War of Mine is that you play as a group of survivors in a war-torn city. And the entire point of the game is to just slowly grind you down. And I would have liked to talk about that game first, if I'm being honest, but I am just not in a place right now where I really want to dive into that sort of darkness. I played a significant chunk of it, but I didn't finish a full playthrough just because I found myself feeling really conflicted about it. On the one hand, it was a really well-made game. I do think everyone should check out This War of Mine, but it is a complicated game because it is also fun to play. Like, the systems are really solid and good, which doesn't sound like it would be a bad thing, except that the subject matter is so horrible that I was feeling bad about enjoying playing it, if that makes sense. Instead, I wound up playing quite a bit of Frostpunk. Now, Frostpunk is an interesting game. So it came out in 2018, which, at least for the next week and a half or so, was last year. Essentially, it is about the end of the world, except it is envisioning the end of the world as a climate crisis, which seems pretty on the nose, granted, but it has a unique twist. Instead of dying from a planet that is too hot, people are dying from a planet that has become too cold. So in a way, it's a bit of an escapist fantasy, albeit kind of a horizontal one rather than like a, managing to get past the danger or, fix it before it even starts. We're just kind of trading off one hellscape for another. But it does present like this really interesting alternate history. And so in Frostpunk, essentially the world has cooled down to such an extent that everything has become just snow and ice and these small bastions of humanity that are kept afloat by going out into the cold and harvesting whatever resources are left. So whether that's like petrified trees or coal or steel, all these different things. And so with the resources that you gather, you have to keep your people alive. So this is a strategic building sim where you play as a city administrator, a city leader, and you dictate where buildings are going to be placed and what resources are going to be prioritized. And it's a very familiar and comfortable feeling for people who are really into those kinds of management and building games, which I very much am. Which probably led to me putting in almost 100 hours. I am certain by the time all of the DLC comes out for this game that I will have put in probably over 150 hours into Frostpunk. So bear in mind that pretty much everything I say in this episode is from the perspective of someone who genuinely loves playing this game, and the critiques come from a place where I view this very positively. So Frostpunk is incredibly interesting. It is simultaneously a fantasy because it does drive, it dives very deeply into the pool and like cultural associations of steampunk. There are like flying dirigibles, and there is like a giant thermal reactor that powers your town, and there are giant robots that do your bidding and like do work autonomously. And there's all of these different things that serve to make this a very fanciful setting. However, it is also very forward-looking in that I think that this game is oddly prescient, and I'm not sure whether that is by design or happenstance. So, and what do I mean by that? So, basically, in the gameplay loop of Frostpunk, you are examining a lot of the tropes that come out of steampunk. A lot of the cultural associations that people have with the Victorian era are kind of pulled out of steampunk and put on display in Frostpunk. So you have stuff like outdated practices like child labor, but that's mixed with the far more advanced technology, and it creates a nice and kind of fanciful effect, right? However, I think that this game is oddly prescient because it uses that to kind of cloak this message that is kind of a warning against what could happen in the future. And what I mean by that is a phrase that we're going to keep coming back to, I think, throughout this episode, eco-fascism. And now eco-fascism is basically a specific type of fascism in which a strong leader comes to power by using the stresses and anxieties of ecological disaster to maintain and exert control. So essentially what you're playing as in Frostpunk is an eco-fascist simulator, which sounds very bad, but I think that because the game is so honest about that, it allows us to kind of explore that topic more deeply and understand really where a lot of these anxieties are coming from, where a lot of these interesting how you can be pushed into a position and a government like that, even without necessarily intending anything bad to happen. So basically, as you progress throughout Frostpunk, the ecological pressures on your city increase. Like that's kind of how the game loop of Frostpunk works. So it starts out, you have maybe a week of relatively mild weather, and then all of a sudden storms will come and it will become much harder to survive, and temperatures will keep dropping, and it just gets harder and harder to live. So as that happens, you have to be progressing along a tech tree and prioritizing different things that get researched, which allow you to survive better and deal with these colder and colder temperatures. Now, the problem is that that alone isn't necessarily enough. Even if you are adhering to the tech tree, even if you are dealing with these different problems and optimally dispersing your citizenry to pursue different goals and priorities, you're not going to be able to do it. And that's by design. It is trying to force the player into picking one of two different directions. Because as you play the game, you are given this book of laws, and you can sign these different law ordinances, and they will give you different benefits or powers. For example, you can sign an emergency shift law, which allows you to make workers just work without stopping for 24 hours straight. And that can be very useful if there is a coming storm, a coming disaster that you know is on the horizon, and you need to get just that much little more research done, or that many more resources harvested. So that can be useful. However, eventually there are a couple other avenues that you may most likely will be pushed down. So there are the adaptation laws, which are kind of your base laws, like the emergency work order. But then there are kind of these ways of life that you can adopt, and you can choose between faith and order. And order takes you down this path that leads to armed guards and watchtowers and kind of like the traditional trappings of a fascist state. Faith takes you down a different route, which culminates in basically you declaring yourself the one true pope, the basically an apocalypse pope, and declaring that you are the one true arbiter of the God's will. And either of those directions are fascist. Essentially, you are the strong leader who can keep everyone in line, and you can do that either with the ideological fist of the church or with the gauntleted fist of military might. And either of those directions lead you to being kind of this supreme, unquestionable power. And you are led in that direction directly because of the forces and problems presented by the extreme ecological crisis. Now, when I say that this game might be prescient, and I don't know to what degree that is intentional, what I mean is that our current planet faces a very similar problem. Granted, we are not in the middle of an apocalyptic ice age. However, our planet has definitely been put on a trajectory that will take us in a direction that will lead to certain parts of our planet becoming uninhabitable wastelands. And that is either and that will most likely be in the form of like heat and deserts and wastelands that are hot rather than wastelands that are cold. But those are some of the defining factors that determine whether or not eco-fascism will arise, because ultimately fascism is what people turn to when they are scared, when they don't have much hope, and when one person comes along and says, follow me and you will never go hungry again. It's Scar mobilizing the hyenas in The Lion King, which is incidentally why the hyenas are all goose-stepping. That's meant to be a cinematic parallel with Nazis. I feel like maybe that was a condescending thing to say, but my brain is just kind of like going, the wheels are spinning, folks. The wheels are spinning. So Frostpunk basically allows us to explore how and why eco-fascism can occur under those circumstances. And that's really, really interesting. That's a really cool thing for a game to do. And the other aspect is that it allows us to also simultaneously be critical of both steampunk and Victorian era, I guess, thought patterns. My brain, so just to clarify for you listening, my brain is mush today. So I'm not, I know what I want to say, but I don't necessarily know how to phrase it. So what I'm going after is that Victorian era beliefs and ideology. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. how that has kind of come into the modern day, how those beliefs and ideas can influence us even now, and how they aren't necessarily healthy. And like there are some of the obvious ones like child labor, or like working 24 hours straight. But then there are also other aspects of the ideology that kind of comes to the forefront at various points of the game. Like, for example, if you have a basically you can build a tavern in the town, and it's called a public house, and people can go there, and it basically helps them relieve stress. Well, you can eventually unlock an option where you can employ sex workers at this public house. And if you do that, then if you have the faith ideology, the faithful see the sex workers as a sign of wickedness, and eventually they'll even see like the public house itself being open for long hours as being wicked. And like there are just all of these kind of uptight Puritan like viewpoints on certain aspects of society. And I think that framing it in a steampunk context makes those ideas. It takes those ideas out of the past and puts them in the present. And with that, you are able to then examine them a little bit more critically and realize that maybe they're not necessarily right. It gives us an additional way to reframe those ideas. I don't know if I'm explaining myself very well, but this is unscripted and I'm doing my best. I do want to say that I haven't found very many good critical articles about Frostpunk. And if you're looking to do some additional reading to kind of like get your brain rolling on some of these ideas, I would highly recommend you check out Dante Douglas's critique in Paste. Dante writes about, touches on some of the fascist leanings of the game, and also talks about how that can be very interesting. Because it's not doing it thoughtlessly or in a way that doesn't have consequence or minimizes how bad fascism can be. Instead, it is something that very just kind of presents things very matter-of-factly. And it doesn't necessarily even point any fingers. It is saying... the game is almost essentially saying that if this happens, and if, the old society is cast into chaos, this is the kind of government and political force that emerges from disaster. So basically, this is kind of like what we have to look forward to, and it's actually super scary. And you can kind of see that if you are able to build essentially, if you're able to build a city in this game that self-sustains, your city is probably not going to be good. Like, it's going to be a scary place where there are people who patrol the streets trying to make sure that no one is doing anything contrary to the faith. And they will beat people or execute people or torture people to get them to stay in line. Or you have armed guards patrolling everywhere and who are more than willing to kill or beat or imprison people indefinitely for infractions that might not even be that big a deal. So it's a game that basically gives us tools, and we use those tools, And it doesn't necessarily judge us for using them, but it is also aware that these things aren't necessarily good. The things that are happening are bad, in fact. And even if you do like the best you can possibly do, because anytime you finish one of the main scenarios in this game, you get an ending, and it basically shows your city being built up from scratch, and it kind of gives you like some text over the screen that recaps some of the pivotal decisions and outcomes that occurred during the playthrough. And what's interesting is even under like the best of circumstances, basically, if you do everything right, if you have a perfect run, if you never allow your society to get completely awful, then you are given an ending where the text basically is like, yeah, there's still hope. Like, things are awful, but there's still hope that we haven't gone too far and we can pull ourselves back from the brink. However, that ending is very difficult to get. More than likely, it's much more likely that you are going to get a playthrough where, yeah, you had to institute the Faith Keepers, and yeah, you had to rough up a lot of people. You had to get your hands dirty and do some not great things. But if you get those endings, then I think the game is trying to tell you that, hey, there's something not right here. Right? You're supposed to think about this a little bit. Why wasn't that right? And that's part of what I think I like about this game so much, is that it has a bedrock of extremely solid mechanics that are objectively fun to play, and that's why the game eventually got an endless mode. However, this game didn't launch with that. Instead, it had a stable of these different scenarios, and it doesn't judge you for how you tried to do them. It just gives you the tools and the opportunity to think about what you did and why you did it. And it can feel bad, especially if you fail, because essentially if you fail in any of these scenarios, it's implied that you have essentially doomed the society to failure, and there's no hope for that place, or for you, because you've been exiled into a snowy wasteland. So the game is not pretending like a situation in which eco-fascism would emerge is necessarily anyone's fault. But it is presenting this situation in which things can get really scary really fast, because people need to deal with the challenges that are set before them. And if they can do that by sacrificing all of their personal freedoms, if they can do it by even sacrificing friends and family, if it allows them to save themselves or their children, people will do that. And that's kind of the stark choice that Frostpunk puts before its players. So it's an interesting rumination on that entire crisis that is in the game, and also that we're slowly starting to see pop up around the world, where you have people who are moving to escape famine, and that is turning into a huge problem, and there are wars going on over resources, because there's not enough in that particular corner of the world. So these are not the analogy that is like the connection between Frostpunk and the real world is not actually as far-fetched and far away as it might initially seem on the surface. And I think it's valuable that Frostpunk is almost completely alone in building a game to respond and offer us the chance to think about it and talk about it. At most you get like a blurb in a game where, oh yeah, this planet used to be lush and vibrant, and then gosh golly, climate change happened. Wasn't that awful? And yeah, I mean, that's good. It's good to have that, but what we really need are more games like Frostpunk that give us this opportunity to sit back and think about this oncoming disaster and how we can deal with it, and how we can, at the very least, understand what's happening to our planet just that much better. Yeah. And I think this is a game that is only going to become more pertinent as time goes on. You can kind of see it in the way that fascist leaders have been kind of getting elected or coming into power around the world in response to xenophobic concerns about outsiders coming into the country. It's a lot of this knock-on effect of people who are being displaced by climate change or displaced by resource shortages that are being caused by climate change. And it is only going to get more dire as time goes on. So I just think that there's no other game really that is offering us the chance to think about things quite like Frostpunk is. I think that is super important and honestly really cool. And I know that this took a while for thinking about Frostpunk. It took a while for things to click for me. Because the mechanics are so solid and it's not necessarily as grounded in reality, at least on first blush, as something like this War of Mine, which draws heavily from the Bosnian War and the Siege of Sarajevo, which is why the name of that place was stuck in my head. And that was a conflict that occurred in the 90s and was essentially some of the heaviest and longest fighting since World War II. So, that very clearly had that real world grounded parallel. Frostpunk doesn't, and so it took a while for it to really click with me what it was going for. And, you know, I really had me kicking myself for a while because it should have been really obvious to me that 11-bit Studios, this place that has made this War of Mine, a game that was so clearly about something that it had me feeling very depressed and uncomfortable almost the entire time I was playing it. I had me kicking myself that I didn't realize that they were doing something that was about something. Like, I was doing that thing where, you know, you're just like, oh, it's just a game. It's not necessarily about anything, which is one of my biggest pet peeves. And I was doing it. It made me upset. So, yeah, it's Frostpunk is about this eco-fascist streak that we have where we will, you know, collectively humanity will gather around strongmen to like keep them safe in times of crisis. You know, it's the same impulse that created feudalism in the first place. And so it is both this warning and an exploration of what happens in those moments of crisis. What happens when there is no place you can escape to, and you have to make the best of where you are. And when there is no outside help necessarily coming to save you. So it's an interesting game from a perspective of people who haven't necessarily lived through this, but we can imagine living through it. And that's really where the value of Frostpunk lies. It allows us this safe space to have this mental experiment and figure out really what it means and why it's not a good thing, and how maybe we might avoid falling into those pitfalls. So basically, I played this game a lot over the past couple months. My depression has been flaring up quite a bit for factors beyond my control necessarily. Um, and so I played a lot of Frostpunk. And it's only during that time with the game that the mechanics really clicked with me and the content of the game clicked with me. And I haven't really talked about the game itself too much. The building feels really good. There's this whole rhythm to it where you don't want to have your workers doing things during the night, otherwise they'll freeze to death. It is a brutal game, but it is brutal in a detached and omniscient way. You know, you have this view of the city that is very far above the actual working people. You are not really connected with the individual workers. However, every worker is given a name. Every worker has relations or family. There are children in the game, and you can decide to put them to work or put them in childcare houses, or, you know, it more so than any other management game, Frostpunk has made me question morality over functionality, because there are a couple situations in the game, specifically the refugee scenario, where signing a child labor law is actually almost necessary for survival. I'm not going to say it's 100% necessary, because maybe it's not, and I just haven't been able to do it. But if you don't do it in that situation, your entire society is virtually doomed from the start. So it's so interesting how these different ecologies and scenarios can push you in different directions. And those weren't things that I was necessarily thinking about, because I'll be honest, the first time I played this game, I was not super impressed. I actually played through one full playthrough. I was like, okay, I got it now. I get it. Yep, apocalyptic city builder. All right. I didn't particularly care for that. And then I put it down, and I didn't play it for like a year. And then I finally picked it back up over the last couple months, and I started playing it, and I was like, I was wrong. This is actually really brilliant. Like, really good. And I think part of it is just my depressive brain having more time to really chew on this material. And the other aspect is that I've played a lot of Civilization. Like I've played hundreds of hours of Civilization 4 and 5. And none of that has been focused enough to make me really think about the policies or the building or the strategies that I came up with to survive and win, more than like 2 seconds at a time. Like, Civilization is not a game that is built to make you really think about civilization, which is odd, actually. It's built to make you consider like how cool history and like historical events or achievements might be, but it's not really designed to make you really engage with the politics of history. Like, you know, you're not really engaging with you know, the political views of Mahatma Gandhi, for example. Like the classic joke that Gandhi likes to nuke people in Civilization 5. And there's and it's very much simplified down and in Civilization. And, we'll probably talk about Civilization at some point on this podcast because I love it to death. But I definitely think that is one of the main weaknesses of the franchise, is that it is a game first and doesn't necessarily consider the ramifications of a lot of its different systems. Because you consider the functionality before you consider the moral implications. And so Frostpunk is a game that reverses that. You consider the moral implications before you consider the structural ramifications. What does this like? What does this actually mean? Like, I'm gonna form the Faith Keepers, and they're going to enforce my will. I mean, sure, that drops my the discontent of my city, but I could also build a public house and people could just get drunk instead of me sending out like a strangely militarized religious force. It is more focused and considered than Civilization, and that's one of the things I really love about Frostpunk. It has staked its claim and is going to explore this topic, and I respect that. I respect that a lot. One of the things that I will say is that I wish that there were more technology trees. I wish that there were more ideological facets to explore in the game. Because I definitely think that, simplifying it down to, there are these two different directions that kind of an eco-fascist might go down, religious or militarized, I think simplifies it quite a bit, and I would like there to be more nuance, maybe even like something that draws more on the Victorian era and ideology, that some of the ideologies from that time that have persisted to this day. For example, you could tackle like Malthusianism, which is kind of the overpopulation ideology that was spread by Thomas Malthus, which gained some degree of popularity because that was basically the ideology of Thanos from Avengers Infinity War. And that is an outdated and monstrous ideology, but you could very easily see why people might turn to something like that for an explanation in times of crisis. And also, the entire basis of Malthusianism is wrong. So it's just a bad ideology in general, and you could use the different policies that you adopt as a way of highlighting that. It's bad. It's not good. And overpopulation is a myth. So if you want to know more about that, there's actually a really good YouTube essay, long-form YouTube essay by Peter Coffin that goes into kind of the eugenicist origins of overpopulation. And it's really, really good. I would highly recommend it. Let's see. I am starting to go hoarse from talking. I really should have brought some water, but I drank it before the show to take my pills. I was going to make this episode an honorable mention, because it is just me, and usually I have someone to bounce ideas off of or disagree with, or we can clarify and go back and forth, but I definitely believe that Frostpunk has so much more going on under the hood than many people gave it credit for. granted, it was nominated for a lot of awards. It was nominated for all kinds of things, like best soundtrack, like best strategy game, best narrative, like all kinds of different things. But it didn't really, I don't think it won many of them. And I can definitely see how some people might go for it, might go for something else as like a more fun strategy game, but it's a strategy, it's a city building strategy game that is actually about something. And that's really rare and cool. And I think that it deserves to be considered one of the best games, period, because it is building up a worldview and allowing us to explore this thing that is so on point and present and important, and asking us to consider these big ideas and dig into the politics that motivate some of these monstrous actions. Like, why is this happening in this corner of the world? Why is that happening in that corner? And why are the things in your city happening? And because you are kind of in the driver's seat, you are in the best position to understand why people are upset, why you need to adopt certain policies that might on the outside seem monstrous. And then look at the real world and see that this is actually a pretty good microcosm of why sometimes people who seem monstrous can rise to power in these dire situations. So I think that when you understand why things happen, you are better equipped to deal with preventing them or combating them, not necessarily with violence, but in whatever political arena you happen to inhabit. So I think that Frostpunk is just a very compelling argument to better understand a situation that is going to become more and more common in the world going forward. And I think that that's very important. And I think that this game largely got overlooked as just another city builder with, fantastical visuals slapped on top of it. So you should definitely play Frostpunk. It is on consoles now, I believe. Consoles and PC. And with that, I'm going to peace out and drink some water. Thank you all so much for listening. If you have never heard of the Best Games Period before, if you just stumbled on this episode, you can find us over on SoundCloud, Libsyn, iTunes, Apple Podcasts. I don't know if I said SoundCloud, but I'm going to say it again. SoundCloud, you can find us there. And we are also on patreon.com/bestgamesperiod. You can listen to the most recent episode of any given week by becoming a patron for any given amount. And on top of that, if you give, you'll have to look at the tiers. I'm having so many mind farts today. But those who donate above a certain tier will be able to watch our chill AMA editing streams and just hang out with me, ask me questions, chat, see what the editing process is all about. And there is also a Discord that will be launching shortly. Our next episode planned so far is going to be a best of 2019 episode / best games of the decade. So you will want to listen to that. Super excited. And that should feature the wonderful Marcus Stewart, friend of the show. Look forward to that one. And on top of that, I think that's everything. So thank you so much for listening to the show. Thank you so much for the people who tuned in live. That is fantastic. I love seeing your comments pop up. I thank you so much to the chat for occasionally interjecting to help me remember a word or phrase that I'm really looking for or struggling to find. That is very helpful, and you're all lovely and handsome. So with that being said, I'll see you on the flippity dippity.